Hello and welcome. We're just going to kind of give a few minutes for participants to start coming in before we got to start with introductions and things like that. I'm aware we've had quite a few people interested in joining us this evening, which is wonderful to hear. But I just don't want people to miss some of the introductions and things like that before we get started. So we'll just pause for a moment and let people start coming through. I will repeat this as we go on, but if people could please, if you have questions, put them into the Q&A. We're not going to use the chat as sometimes things can get missed. So if you could please enter any questions or maybe comments and things like that into the Q&A is what we'll be using. All right. So I'll get us started just looking at time. So I'm Dr. Hildy Bennett. I work as a director for student experience on the MACP program. And I'm really delighted to have been invited today to be a part of the alumni panel with questions that you can all ask. So I will introduce each of our guests. And then we can get started. So we have with us today Korina Wynd. So Korina has graduated in May 2023. Korina stayed with her practicum placement, kind of moving forward from her afterwards her practicum. And now she's going to be starting her own private practice next week, which is very exciting. We have Maryam Almasi. She also graduated in 2023. Maryam has been running her own virtual private practice. So those of you who are interested in private practice pieces, we have some wonderful experts here. We also have with us Joseph Wong. Joseph graduated in 2021. And he's been working in a combination of some hospital settings, some private practice settings. He also runs his own group practice. So we have a range of different experiences that students have been, or former students have had. In terms of this evening, this is a chance for you to ask any questions that you might have, maybe about the program or certain experiences, that kind of thing. So if you can enter any questions that you have into the Q&A, that would be wonderful. And while we're waiting for those pieces, those questions to come on through, let's start off our evening tonight just thinking about, what each of our guests, what inspired you to pursue the MACP program. So I'll pop over to you first, Korina.
You did that to me all the time in practicum. Korina, would you like to go first?
I was
Sure, I'll go first.
Korina's practicum instructor, as I was, and also skills instructor as well. So,
I'm having flashbacks. So what inspired me to join the program? So I had been a teacher for about 25 years. And I enjoy working with youth. I enjoy working with people. I enjoy helping people. And teacher is really a helping profession. But I'd reached a point where I am a music teacher and it was kind of not really speaking to my soul anymore. And so I just did some investigating and I thought, hey, I think I could do this and I think I would really enjoy this. So I looked into it and started the program in 2021. I think the pandemic was a big part of that as well, because online teaching is I really appreciate what online has done for us is in everything, teaching, being able to get a degree, but I found it really difficult to manage relationships and have relationships, and I'm very relational. So I looked into the program, thought, yeah, I could work with people in this way. And so I did the program and here I am, enjoying every minute of it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Maryam, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I wanted to become a therapist really randomly almost. Basically, growing up, I struggled a lot with anxiety and I always kind of cared about mental health because of my own experiences, along with my experiences as someone in like a multicultural home. I kind of always wanted to find a therapist who was similar to me or who had like a similar lifestyle to me. And after my undergraduate program, I was kind of confused. I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm not sure. And through my own lived experiences, I kind of decided that I think the right step was to be that person that I always was looking for, and to give that support back to the world. And then I started the program and I kind of, everything clicked and I felt like that was the path for me.
Thank you. Joseph?
It's amazing because I supervise a lot of students and non-students, seeing people from really different background come into the program. For me, myself, I have a social work background since when I was in high school. I was fortunate to meet some really amazing individuals who guide my path and to a lot of experience about community building, fighting isolation, adjustment to a new country. I was immigrated from China 20 something years ago. And when I joined this program, it was beyond what I expected. I learned way more about mental health, which used to be a taboo subject in my home country and in other cultures. And in a way, this program really opened up my eyes to something even beyond when I first expected it before I entered the program here.
Thanks, Joseph. Lovely. I mean, it's really lovely to hear about the different paths that have brought you here, from career experiences, lived experiences, the histories, the unique histories that we carry with us. And what I'm hearing also is that overall interest in serving communities and being with people. So that's lovely. I've noticed our Q&A has filled up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start just going through the questions. So feel free to unmute yourselves and answer these. The first question is, what's a piece of advice you wish someone gave you when you were a student? Or what advice might you have for current students?
I can answer first.
Thanks, Joseph.
One of the key advice here is in this program, there's two parts. One is the research ability, writing, reading, because you want to follow the evidence-based model, the decades of research in psychology, no matter it's the master degree or the PhD level. This combination, and equally or even more important is the practical part about the practicum.
Mhm.
The practicum is probably 95% of the learning, even though you do probably 2 years of reading the books at the beginning. So one thing is important is the importance of planning the practicum even before when you are considering the program, your regions, the in-person or virtual options. Yeah, talking to people, starting planning way at the early stage of the program.
Thanks, Joseph.
That's interesting. And I'm curious, who are we speaking to? Like, what students do we have right now? All
It's
levels,
these
all
students all across the board. So students who have maybe just started this May, as well as students who might be
in practicum?
registered in practicum now. So it's across the
Yeah,
board.
I think what would have probably helped me going into the program, because I came back after really long number of years not having been in school. My education, my writing muscle was really out of shape. But I think the one thing that I didn't anticipate, because I really wanted to do the degree, was how difficult work-life balance was going to be, because I continued to work full-time. I live on a farm. I have young children. Well, they were young children. They both left home since the pandemic. And I continued to work full-time. So it was, up at 5:30 in the morning, get all my chores done, get to the school, spend an hour doing DQs, do my job,
Mhm.
teach into the evening, come home, respond to DQs, do the reading for the next day. It was this hamster wheel that I found really stimulating but exhausting. Just it was really exhausting. I wish if I'd had to do it again, I would definitely find a better balance for myself.
Mhm. Thanks, Korina.
I totally forgot about DQs until you said that. And I think all of us like shook a little bit in our core. Yeah, I agree with both of the things that have just been said, especially what Joseph said around practicum. I think that is like the one opportunity where you're learning so much and you actually get to see your clients for the first time and do all that work. And I think that if I can go back in time and like talk to myself when I was in the program, I'd probably tell myself to do all that research and find a site that aligns with your needs and your goals. and to be less nervous around like finding just any site, but doing that extra work to make sure it's a site that will align with what you're looking for and looking in terms of your like the pathways that you want to go into, and making sure that you're getting that training and that support in your practicum, because it is a long portion of the program as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Joseph.
I also want to add to with Maryam and Korina too. In this program, it is very rigorous, and you'll be surprised how resilient you can be. But on the other hand, we also have to recognize in some of those moments with the DQ, very exhausting, the papers and all that. And there are resources out there, for example, tutors, or even in your field, there is the free counseling clinic. And having counseling yourself is a really good experience. So you can be on the other side of the chair. In the future, you are delivering therapy. So one thing I want to tell students or other students is you don't have to feel stuck. Resources are out there for tutor, counseling, and all that.
I totally agree. And I also found that I really found reaching out to the professors a huge help as well. They're not going to shut you down. They're open to answering questions. They're opening to meet with you. And I found that to be, for me, that was humanizing, because I actually felt like I wasn't just sitting at a computer screen writing DQs to people that were going to rip them to shreds. And then I don't even know who they are for the next course. I found that the professors were sort of a really grounding link for me.
So what I'm hearing across the panel is there's an importance of resourcing ourselves well. So resourcing ourselves well by ensuring that there's self-care pieces, knowing what supports are out there that Yorkville might offer, or we might find in our in our own communities, our own support networks of friends as well. And then also resourcing ourselves in terms of being proactive and finding those important pieces like a practicum site that has a really good fit. So just being aware of some of those resources, really helpful. And Joseph did name some of those as well. And I'll just also highlight, there is Studiosity and things like that students can access. Our library offers really helpful workshops on APA, which I know is one of Korina's favorite areas of expertise now. Just teasing her gently. And there are, those counseling support services and peer support groups as well. So just, resourcing ourselves well. It's an important part, not only for this program, but for this profession. Absolutely. Okay, going on to the next question. It's a question about private practice and what might go into that, either or virtually or in person. Joseph?
I can answer first. Since I graduate, I work a combination of hospitals. I also do private practice with different contracts with different level of the governments, hospitals, and including corrections, some probation clients. So in a way here, when you look at private practice here, you also want to look at the logistics, planning out your schedule. On one hand, the process, you can really adjust your schedule with other family commitment, caregiving to your seniors, parents, or anything, or the newborn. At the same time, you also have to think about the clientele, to balance the income sources. So there is really pros and cons. Working in the hospital system, you have a good support network. You won't be the only one in the clinic here. And mostly it can be in person, so you really interact with other people. So going back to the question about in person and virtual, from my personal experience, you have the same impact for the client in video call and in person, except for a very specific clientele. When I'm working in psychiatry, some clients or patients, they really need inpatient, but we are talking about very rare case. And some of those times we're talking about sometimes they can only tolerate for 15, 20 minutes because they are really in a psychiatric state. So generally speaking, it's the same performance according to the research data out there.
Thanks, Joseph.
I had a hard time deciding whether I wanted to go solo, because I was concerned about just what you were talking about, Joseph. Like if you're with an agency or a hospital, you're not alone. And I know
Mhm.
the first time I saw a client by myself at the clinic, I did my practicum group. We weren't practicing skills, so there wasn't people coming on screen going, oh, "That was great. I would have asked about this. I wasn't sure." So it really felt it was very isolating, and that was one of the concerns I had about going into private practice. But I think if you continue to build your network and keep in touch with people, and you do consultation, I'm going to have supervision for the rest of my life. It's not going to stop me just because I drop my Q or I'm solo practitioner. I think it's really important to be connected, to people in that way. Yeah.
Thanks, Korina.
Yeah. And I think the cool thing about virtual is that you can access so many different types of people because you're not limited to just your city. And that's also kind of nice to be able to see different types of clients. And I think it's very important to network and meet other therapists. And I think one of the greatest ways to do that is like having group supervision, joining local groups for therapists and stuff like that. That way, although private practice can be a little lonely, you have those resources available.
Yeah, like social media is pretty important for that. There's Facebook groups, there's all kinds of people that you can stay connected with. And I think what Joseph was talking about, I mean, that little practical pieces, like I was teasing, we're talking to Dr. Hildy before, saying that I don't even have a couch yet. Like that's how new my space is. It's painted and I have a chair. So by next week, there'll be a couch. And so those pieces sort of start to fall into place. My medical record system is set up. My online intake forms are ready to go, but there's so many little things, the little nitty gritty stuff that you just need to make sure that you've got yourself organized and you're on track and you know what you need to do. And I think that's why I stayed on with my site, just because my learning was still going. I wasn't ready to leave. I was still figuring things out. I have varied clientele, so I needed a lot of support. So that's why I stuck on. But it wasn't an easy decision to leave.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, there's key pieces in there about the organizational, I think there's also what's been named as well by several people is the importance of really thinking into your practice, if you were doing a private practice, and what your clients' needs are, what your needs are, making sure that you don't have you're not working in a silo, right? We know this through all of our codes of ethics as well and our professional bodies that we are members of, the importance of consultation, the importance of supervision, of having those kind of colleague networks, really, really helpful. As well as, the very different pieces that go into a practice. Whereas I think many of us might not even consider, oh yeah, also furniture. Right? But it's not just also furniture. That's an important part of it, right? So there's lots and lots of different things to hold in mind. I've got another question here about how was the transition from being a student to a working professional? Any tips?
I think one of the major transitions is like letting go of the imposter syndrome a little bit from practicum to, I'm actually a therapist now and I'm not a student. I think that's a major transition and just doing a lot of supervision, doing a lot of like work on yourself in that transition. But also like having the confidence to do it, make a decision that works for you, whether that's staying at your practicum site or working at another private practice or starting your own, just really like honing into what feels right to you and accepting that confidence and accepting the fact that you are a graduate as well.
Thanks.
And I think also accepting that you can be confident and not know everything. And it's okay to not know everything because you're not going to ever know anything. You're like a lifelong learner. And that's why staying on at my site, I kept realizing, wow, I keep learning and learning and learning. When is this ever going to stop? Right. So I feel like for me, the transition, the first time I saw a client and I actually hit a, pay bill thing and they had to submit their invoice, it was like, oh, wow, I'm doing this. But there was that feeling of, I'm doing this? Am I doing this? First time I introduced myself, I was on my way to a clinic in Belleville and I was lost. So I'm walking across the parking lot, introduced myself to a security guard. I'm a psychotherapist and I'm a psychotherapist? Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist. it's a weird space to actually be able to wake up and look in the mirror and go, I'm actually now a therapist. I've studied. The learning's been great, but like Joseph said, it's the actual practicum where everything happens, everything comes together, and you actually start to consolidate and be that person. So it is an interesting transition, but it is also really exciting transition.
Yeah, and for myself, going from school to working, uh, I cannot really downplay it, but you are really jumping into the deep end. But I guess when you are helping clients in the future, it is good that you experience yourself so you know how it feel like, and you can break down their all or nothing into progressive steps. I consider myself fortunate. My practicum site, the supervisor, is really well connected. I asked him a lot of questions. He sent me up jobs and referral. And I also talked to my professor, Dr. Sherman in Yorkville at that time, because I also interested not just in working, but pursuing more school, PhD, and other items. And she gave me a lot of options. So I would suggest to really take advantage of that resources. You don't have to go through this journey alone, and a lot of people have gone through it, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Feel free to ask people. Yeah, that my suggestion. That helped me.
Joseph, you also bring up a really good point that it's not like you have to finish and then go into therapy. You can continue with research. You can go into community work. You can go into hospital work. There's lots of places that your degree can take you. It doesn't have to be doing therapy in the way that we're describing. There's lots of opportunities. So just finding the fit that's going to be good for you.
Yeah. And I think that's sometimes a bit of a unique element of our program and of our profession as well, is we do have a lot of optionality that other professions don't necessarily have. And that's something that I know myself personally, I've always appreciated is the flexibility, hence why I'm also here as well, right? Thank you all. Okay, the next question is, what set of skills or knowledge did you learn throughout the program that you found most helpful when you started out as a counselor?
I'm going first on this one because I totally have this, because I can remember next to DQs, the one thing that I really found super frustrating through the entire program was all these self-reflection papers. I found those to be, another one, and they have to be supported with research, and another one, and it became a joke that self-reflection was my superpower. But it actually, self-reflection and self-awareness were the two things that I learned from the program that have made me a better therapist, and that I absolutely, completely, totally could not do my job without. Because when you have countertransference, when you have somebody that's got a really heavy topic, when there's something happening in you, if you're not aware and you don't know what to do, it can be a really scary place to be. So those self-awareness, self-reflection, I am so glad that we had to do all those, and I had to basically learn how to know what was going on with myself.
Thanks, Korina.
For myself, when I go back to the MACP program, is after maybe around 15 years of working in the field. And so going back to school is really rusty. One thing that helps me the most is it's more about the individual courses than it's really about the process. Each course really challenged me to do a lot of reading and research that really speed up the reading, writing skills. Right now, when I'm working, I have to write reports, do research. It make it way easier for me without those struggles, even though I don't like the DQ, but it really helps me to do what I do today, teaching students in practicum or writing reports for court, insurance, and all that. Without all that, DQ struggle, which I don't like it at that time, it doesn't make me the person today. So I would say the it really increase your brain speed.
Thanks, Joseph.
Yeah, and I think that like I think the course that helped me the most was the skills course, and just being able to actually sit there and practice. And I remember being so anxious before the first one, which I think we've all felt that way.
Do you remember thinking, oh my God, we got to fill 15 minutes? We have to talk for 15 minutes? Like it
Yeah,
was,
that felt like an hour or more than
yep,
an hour.
yep.
But I think that taught me a lot because it was an opportunity to make mistakes and to accept that we're not perfect and that we can make those mistakes and that like we're going to be learning and all those things. And I think that really stuck with me, being able to practice, but also to listen to our peers and watch them do therapy and also like catch the things that maybe we don't catch when we're the ones as a therapist.
Yeah, and I just to tag onto that, I seem to be finishing up everybody's sentences, but you sparking things in me. The idea that you approach a client a certain way and you hone in on something, and then your peers are like, oh, I wanted to know more about, and what about this? And at first it's like, God, how did I miss that? But it's not about missing it. It's how you're taking the journey with your client versus how somebody else might take it. It's not right, it's not wrong, right? Lots of different roads.
Absolutely. And it's sometimes I think it can be hard to trust in the process of learning that all these different components that are there have value in it, maybe in ways you didn't necessarily imagined or that you don't necessarily see on the surface, but underneath it is, you know, some of those core pieces, whether it's self-reflection, whether it's, you know, being able to write with a sense of authority if there's a court document or things like that, and providing research-backed practice, you know, interventions that we can call to name that we know that there's backing and you know, such validity in choosing them, all of those pieces. So I appreciate all of those answers as well. Thank you all. Scanning through questions. There's a question about registration with professional associations. Did you find everything was fairly straightforward with your overall process of getting certified and registered?
Mhm.
I'm seeing nods.
Yeah, it was a
I
little
have something to
overwhelming.
add
I found
here.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Oh, go ahead, Korina.
I found it, they're like for the CRPO, for those of us in Ontario, um it's really quite a regulatory body, and it's overwhelming, and there's an awful lot of things that you need to know, a lot of information. But I have not yet had a bad experience with the CRPO. I find them approachable anytime I've needed any questions,
That's
and they'll
great.
happily take your registration money. So it's easy, easy.
Mhm. And I'll add that it is important to pay attention to the different provinces, whether there's a college or the legal requirements of being a counselor or psychotherapist. Even if they don't have any law college or legal restrictions, they may have some volunteer association.
Mhm.
For example, in British Columbia, mostly the insurance will accept the CCPA or the BC Association of Clinical Counselors. That one, you want to really go to a website, to compare between the Yorkville or different schools, the requirements, because sometimes they might need more supervision or less. Some of them, they focus on more of the counseling hours. In some of the different jurisdictions, they have a few stages, and
Mhm.
some jurisdictions, they only allow in-person practicum. So it's something to pay attention to. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. And also just to flag as well, I know our Associate Dean of Academics, Dr. Simon Nutgens, does have regular meetings about with the different provincial regulatory bodies. So that's something to keep an eye out on the Skills Lab for announcements. So all of those different associations, they will have meetings to where, you know, you can discuss your specific questions that you might have and also just hear about the overall process. So just kind of flagging that as well. All right. There's some questions about private practice. How many clients would you typically see in your practice a week? Are there certain platforms that you use to promote your private practice, or also that you use for your private practice as a platform for clients as well?
I can go ahead and answer this first. I personally use the Jane platform. I find it really easy to use and user-friendly for both clients and practitioners. I see around 15 to 20 clients depending on the week. And I know like when I first started the program, I feel like I had a different image of how many clients therapists see. So I just want to share that for a second because I think that like it's very different than like the traditional 9 to 5 where you might think you'd be seeing like 40 clients a week or something like that, but there's a lot of other things that go into private practice and into being a therapist. And then in terms of like advertising or stuff like that, there's obviously like the general stuff like Psychology Today, but then there's also various other forms of like advertisements on social media platforms. And then there's some other really cool therapy sites like Inclusive Therapists or Affordable Therapy Network and other various types. There's probably so many that I don't even know about, but Google has a lot of options, which I think is also nice. Like there's always new things coming out.
So my private practice is kind of tagging on to Lori's, my site, so not proprietary. So my clients are coming with me. So I will be seeing usually around 15 clients a week. I found that starts to taper off in the summer. So you kind of got to keep in mind that there are times of the year where that's like Christmas time. I left sessions open, people would book and then they would cancel, which gets, it can really mess up your own personal schedule. And yes, I offer evening sessions, and that is definitely prime real estate because people need to be able to go to work. Advertising wise, I do Psychology Today. I know the clinic does social media, and I'll get my own social media once I actually have a couch for my clients to sit on. I'll get on top of that. And then there's also, I'm a member of the Psychotherapy Matters virtual clinic, which is a clinic that offers psychiatric consultation and assessment for clients. So they actually put out advertisings for me as well. And I think that's about it for advertising.
And I will speak a little bit from running a group practice here. There are two things here. First is about the amount of clients that you are seeing. Typically, if you are doing a therapy full time, you see a range maybe around 15 to 30 clients. And like Maryam is saying, the income is a little bit different from a traditional job because you can be having an income both counseling and also writing reports. People pay you to write the reports in between the sessions. So sometimes you might not be counseling, but you still have to spend time writing those reports and notes, okay? And the number two here is about the promotion exposure here. I guess the basics, some of the social media website, and I myself, I use the Jane app here. And in terms of promotion, the people do it differently, but I think the one of the foundations is people really know you personally. They know how you carry out yourself. And like Korina is saying, some other doctors or other referral sources, they really know how you work. They know how your therapy is doing, how's your professionalism and work ethics. And I think for my own practice and group practice here, that brings the most clients rather than somebody just click and really like my Instagram post or anything. The most of the traffic really is word of mouth.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing those pieces. There are a few different questions about practicum. So I'm just going to answer a couple of the questions that are there, and then I'll kind of go to more of the process questions to the panel. So it's just asking about how long the practicum takes place. So practicum takes place over two 15-week terms. It's divided into two different courses. So the first is 7113 and the second course is 7203. Generally, students work at the same site throughout their placement. There are some exceptions to that if a site was finding it challenging finding referrals and that kind of thing. Sometimes people add on a secondary site. There's a process to go through it, and it's outlined in a document called the Practicum Manual, which is quite a lengthy document, but it does have really, really good information. It also talks students through the process from kind of beginning to the end of practicum, including finding a practicum placement and that kind of thing. So if you're having kind of some of those practical questions about, okay, practicum, you know, I'm really wanting to get a start on things, I'd suggest you go to the practicum manual first. And get a kind of a flavor for some of the content that's in there. I know practicum also hold regular meetings with students to kind of go over the process and that kind of thing, that you can kind of join those meetings in advance of your practicum starting, and just to kind of answer those questions or just have some room to kind of hear about the overall process. So just kind of flagging those. Okay, and on to kind of the more kind of process pieces. Any advice in terms of choosing a practicum site, or any personal experiences or maybe questions that you've asked your practicum supervisors, that kind of thing? How did you kind of select your site? And yeah, what helped to inform your decision?
For myself, I choose my site because my coworker also went through the practicum in that site. They have really good experience. They offer the one-on-one supervision and also offer maybe like 4 or 5 times a group supervision that I can join. So get a lot of collaborations here. And one suggestions I have based on my personal experience is, it is as much as they interview you as you interview the site.
Mhm.
So I would suggest write down some of the questions. So when you're going on the interview, ask them how is the training, and how often is the supervision, because it really varies in different sites. Some will be less structure, some will be more structure, more support, and what type of clientele, how many clients, do they have enough clients, what are the hours, is there a set hours or you can set your own schedule. I was fortunate for my site because I'm working full-time at that time. They let me set my own schedule. At that time I was working shift work, I'm working overnight all over the place, but that makes it work for me, you know. So there's some of the things that you consider there. I'll write down the questions.
Thanks, Joseph.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Joseph said in terms of like asking them questions, because I think when you're trying to find a practicum site, there's lots of nerves and there's lots of, even just interviews in general can be anxiety inducing. So definitely having those questions, I think that shows the site that you're interested as well, and that you have your own values that you want to meet. And I think it's important to definitely consider also, how much do they charge clients and things like that. Because I know sometimes that is something that's kind of like looked away and people don't really look into that as students. But you also have to consider the huge market of therapists out there. And as students, sometimes it can feel hard to get clients, but to not feel that pressure or responsibility to find your own clients either. Because I know that sometimes sites can, or even just practicum in general, can have that anxious feeling of like, I need to graduate, I need to get my hours. So asking the right questions in your interview to make sure that you get that support, that training, that they'll find you your clients, and that they're being reasonable with things around that to make sure that you aren't overlooked because you're charging a high rate or any of those types of pieces.
That's a tricky piece because we aren't allowed to actually market ourselves to look for clients, right? And so that was
Yeah.
one of the things that I found at my site, is that I was asked to do that, and I kind of thought that I was going to be given clients, and that's how it ended up happening. But it's interesting, your experiences for finding a site are completely polar opposite to mine and to several of my colleagues that I've been with going through Yorkville, and that it was a mad panic. There was no psychotherapist because that was the year that you weren't allowed to be supervised by a social worker. So I did have a placement with a social worker, but I was having a really hard time, for confidentiality reasons, finding a psychotherapist who would actually supervise me during practicum, not being on the site. So my advice, even though as therapists we're not allowed to give advice, my suggestion is to start really early, because I thought I started early, sort of got kind of like towards, I think 3 or 4 months before the practicum deadline was due. I thought it's plenty of time, and it wasn't. And I only got my site because I was shortlisted, and one of her interns deferred to the following term, and she took me. So I
Mhm.
managed to get, otherwise I would have been spending the next 6 months working,
Mhm.
applying again, looking for more sites. So I would suggest getting onto practicum, looking at sites so that you have the opportunity to ask those questions, because I just had to take what I could get because I didn't want to delay graduation. So that was a bit of a panic, and I managed to meet the most wonderful supervisor. She's so supportive, and I learned so much. But I didn't have the opportunity to interview sites. I had to take what I could get.
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel like I had the same experience, but because of that experience, I think it's so important to ask those types of questions. And even though it can be scary, just being able to advocate for yourself in that time as well.
Absolutely. So, with that in mind, are there specific questions that you would go to a site, or that, if you were seeing a student that you would like them to ask you, in terms of getting a flavor of what you offer or what, you're looking for? How might you, any like advice or suggestions on more specific questions? I mean, there was a specific question about, are you going to be charging sliding scale as a student? Or sometimes students are given like a pro bono for clients rate. And that can influence absolutely it can influence client numbers and things like that. But yeah, any kind of more like specific questions that
Yeah, like the
students.
clientele, like what Joseph was saying, because I remember
Mhm.
Emily from our practicum group, she was doing
Mhm.
solution focused, and it was all about, she was working with
The
drivers,
accident.
vehicle accidents, right? And it was really, and she was just, the clients were being dumped on her, and then it was like cookie cutter therapy almost, and it was frustrating for her. So I think just knowing what your clientele is going to be,
Mhm.
and what the expectation that the clinic has on you, because if it's unfortunate, but I know that lots of clinics do make money off of their interns because they earn 100% of what the intern brings in. So my clinic charged $60 as an intern rate, but I know there are clinics in Toronto that charge $180 for intern rate, and that goes directly to the clinic because we can't earn money to students.
Mhm.
So asking some of those pieces just to know what you're stepping into, the type of clientele, what the charging is, um, and Joseph said the expectation, like my first, I didn't have a Sunday to myself all of practicum because that was the day that I was given to have in office because
Mhm.
the office was used. So I celebrated the first Sunday I had off. But it also leaves open a lot of opportunity for people that work and that they can only come on Sundays. So
Mhm.
I think just look, how is it going to fit into your life? If you have a young family, if it doesn't matter, what's the schedule going to be like? What is your expectations of me? What's the supervision going to be like? When are we going to meet? Is there group? All of those pieces.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think asking about the types of clients and also if there's like a set modality that
Mhm.
the practice has, as well as if you're just thrown into seeing clients or is there training in the first week? Um, it like what does that support look like? What does that training look like? Um, your schedule,
Mhm.
how like do you have access to somebody to talk to after your sessions? Because
Mhm.
like emergencies can happen, things can happen. I think it's important to think about all those things for sure and ask those types of questions.
Yeah, and that's supervisor related for sure. I'm very lucky. I had several client crises in my practicum, like several, and I had to reach her after
Mhm.
to actually get some guidance on what do I need to do. And she was very open to that. She was very, very receptive to me reaching out anytime I needed her.
Thanks, everyone.
And adding on to that, some of the basic logistic questions, asking about the site, have they have any students before?
Mhm.
Have there any students from Yorkville before, from your own province before? It is important. So
Mhm.
they know your province regulations and asking, are you the only student that is starting, or will you be starting with a group of students together, have more support?
Mhm.
And what is the expectation for taking client? Are there minimum clients or maximum clients?
Mhm.
And if you are not comfortable seeing the client, can you turn away,
Mhm.
and send it back to your practicum site? Those are some of the basic questions. And also, Maryam is talking about what is the schedule for orientation
Mhm.
or trainings and all that. And any of some of the very, very basic one, are there any training for note taking, or I need to pay for a course elsewhere to do that, writing case notes, case conceptualizations, and are you able to meet with the professors for the formative and summative meeting? How flexible is the schedule? They all play into the role. Yeah, some of the basic logistics, it can be very difficult if it is not discussed earlier.
That's interesting because I found out I was like the second student the site had ever had. So she had just started seeing students, and lots of pieces of information were conflicting because she didn't really have it figured out yet. And she was still in the process of creating her policies and procedures manual. There was a student manual, but they were sort of in the editing phase. So I think that's a really good point to bring up, Joseph, is what exactly are you dealing with as far as your site's experience? Because that's going to be really indicative of how they're going to be able to support you or not.
Thank you. I don't know if students have been taking notes, but there were some really fantastic questions in there, or maybe worth, playing back the recording at some stage as well, just to kind of get a flavor of some of those questions, because there was a mix between like the practicalities, how does this work in my life, but also about some of the process as well, and goodness of fit. Definitely. I think we sometimes talk about that kind of concept in therapy of the goodness of fit. It's not about perfect, right? There's never going to be a perfect site, just like we'll never be a perfect therapist. But is there a goodness? Is it good, good enough fit? So really, really helpful pieces there. Okay, we're still going through. I keep going through questions, but they keep coming. So this is really, really wonderful. We've got about 10 or so minutes left. Okay, just scanning through questions. As counselors, has your comfort level grown in knowing when, how, why to refer a client? And how have you developed your own relationships with referring clinicians?
Oh, in here, I'll add, as you are practicing, you will start to know other psychotherapists. You will go into supervision. You go into peer supervision. You will develop a network when you're taking post MACP courses for some advanced modalities. You build your network there. And in this process here, you have to know your scope. What is your niche of clients? What is your comfort level? So there's both the subjective confidence and also the objective competence that you have to consider. You might be competent to do something, but if you're not subjective confident, you have to refer either way. Yeah. And when you refer that, you just refer with, we call it the warm transfer, you talk to the other therapist to make sure it is a suitable match. And in a lot of the different jurisdictions, it is also a requirements. You being able to refer is part of your competence for the standards of practice here.
I'm going to continue to offer 20-minute free consultations for everybody that's wanting to see me. And I don't allow intake sessions bookable online because once a client starts to see you, then you're into a bit of a messier situation. So you can very quickly, like I had a client contact me, and it was she had eating disorders, and they were not managed, and she wanted to see her other therapist for the eating disorders and me for anxiety. So we can't really separate those out. So what I did is I met with her, I listened to her, and I gave her 3 different referrals because she was wanting to leave her other counselor. So I said, you can try this, this, and this. This is outside of my scope of practice. Here's some suggestions. You just don't ever leave people hanging, and you don't ever just sort of say, I'm sorry, we can't see you, right? So you just have to make sure that you are, like Joseph said, the warm transfer. You're just managing people ethically, and remembering you're working with people. They've come to you for help. They want your help, and if you can't give it to them, then you ethically are responsible for finding or suggesting places that they can go.
And I think, Korina, you mentioned the magical number of 3. I think that CPRO guidance is 3 referrals. So that's, it's not just in fairy tales. 3 has a good ring to it.
Magic number.
Yeah, a magic number. All right. There are a couple of questions directed towards you, Joseph, about a hospital type placement. So there's a student who is considering working at a local hospital post practicum for in-person experience and supervision following a fully virtual practicum. What was your experience? I know you're still in hospitals, but what is your experience working like in a hospital environment? How have you found that?
Yeah. When I was working in a hospital, I do supervise some interns in the hospital settings. I myself didn't do my practicum throughout my Yorkville practicum. I actually applied, but I didn't get it. Um, but anyways, when you're doing in a hospital settings, you have the regular once a week supervision with your supervisor. Some of the basic logistics, you have all the workbooks, you don't have to print them out as in your in a private settings. You have all the consent form in the folders, when you see a client, you just get them. And there's a printer, you can print things. They have their own computer system, charting, they will give you training on that. So in a way, it is a very structured settings. And then in the hospital, they also have the training, the modules you can sign up for free. So you do have a lot of good support there. And obviously, every day in person, you bump into different other therapists, social workers. You have a lot of exchange ideas. There's a lunchroom there. Uh, so I would say working in a hospital is a good experience. Yeah, you also there's so many different departments. You can work as a counselor or psychotherapist, or you can work in intake. And think about this, you graduate in MACP. Some people might work in intake doing 3 hours, 15-minute phone call for the whole career, and then they retire. Haven't done any one single counseling session. And it's okay too. They pay the same, in the hospital. And some people might go into the mental health counseling first. And after a while, maybe they want to take a break. They want to case management to do some of the logistics, almost similar to like a social worker. And then they may bounce back to the intake or triage. So there's some mobility in the hospital here. So there's pros and cons about that. Yeah. The pay is not as good as private practice and not as flexible, but at the same time, you have paid vacations. If you are self-employed, vacation is not paid.
I bet you don't have to buy your own couch either.
Yes.
Thank you so much for answering that.
Mhm.
There is more questions about practicum. So just thinking about the overall workload of practicum in terms of managing practicum stuff plus working. How much time did you spend in sessions with client? How much with supervisor? That will be a little bit site specific. There are different Yorkville regulations in terms of that. So you have a minimum of 1 hour supervision each week. So that's kind of the 2 15-week terms is a minimum of 30 hours of supervision, which is either individual or dyadic. Different sites do offer different pieces depending on if you have other students or how big the clinic or the setting might be. Sometimes there's peer supervisions that are kind of in addition to your individual or dyadic supervision, as well as, as Korina mentioned as well, availability of supervisors. Sometimes supervisors make themselves very available in terms of fielding different questions or crises and emergencies. So it's a bit tricky to estimate, kind of the general time, but minimum would be an hour every week that you're on site. You would have an hour of supervision. But I'll skip past, sorry about that blurb there, but in terms of how did you find the workload? I know earlier on in the session today, there was mention of just the volume of and the pace. So maybe we can spend some time speaking a little bit on that.
Well, I'm probably not really a good one to speak on that because I wanted to lead a revolt when I learned that we had to do the capstone paper because I was frustrated that I was doing continual research papers again when I had so much client care that I had to do. So my time was really, I felt really frustrated that I'm still schooling And at this point, I'm seeing clients, I'm doing case consultations. I was doing hospital consultations at that point. I was, my client numbers had gone through the roof. You're doing your own case notes. You're editing and signing off on all your own case notes. You're really starting to be sort of kicked out of the nest. Particularly in second term, that's why I was sort of joking about the self-reflective papers. I mean, they were easy enough to write, but it seemed like there was always one more thing, and I just wanted to focus on my clients. So I guess the suggestion would be, although I failed miserably at it, start your capstone early. Yeah, I wrote mine in 2 weeks, so don't stress. You'll get it done. You will get it done. You will get it done. You'll do what you have to do. And I did well. Dr. Hildy can attest to that. So
This is true.
you can write well in 2 weeks.
I think practicum can be a very big experience just because, there is the course, there is like client work, supervision, writing your notes, and maybe even other requirements of your site, depending on your site, right? Because it's not just your direct hours, but your indirect hours. So I think there is a lot of work to the practicum, but I know we talked earlier about how there are times where things are a little slower. So I think like typically, the beginning of your practicum might be a little slower, and then certain holidays might be slower. So I think taking advantage of those slow times to kind of get things done and try to be structured and organized, I think that's probably the best way to make sure that you have time for yourself while also doing this practicum that does take a lot.
And adding to that, Korina and Maryam here, in the counseling process, the adjustment is quite big. Because when you are seeing client, the attention, no matter you are looking at a screen or in person, you have to really pay attention to the airfare, body expressions here. Uh, Counseling is very intense in a way, so it takes some time to get used to it. Compared to like you work another job, you don't have to pay attention every single minute, right? You would have to listen. At the beginning, it can be very overwhelming. And then after the session, your case notes, you don't even know where to begin, because you might be writing too much, or writing too little. Um, and so at that adjustment, it is very important to really talk to your professor or your supervisor so you can, at the beginning, you go through that, it will be a little bit chaos. It's part of the process here, and to be able to streamline and become more and more efficient and energy efficient when you're carrying out the therapy in person and online there, making it so you'll be able to do it more effective and rather than wasting some unnecessary energy there. But by no means it is intense. It takes adjustment for sure.
I think you just mentioned the practicum group. I think my group was a rock. Like, I wish we could have met every week. It was really important to have other students in the same situation. And we still keep in touch now. We actually really supported each other. And that's, I think, what got me through, knowing that and being able to bring cases, being able to see other people's struggles, hear that, you don't feel alone, because it is extremely intense. Because they're real people. They're not students making problems up.
Thank you all for all of those really thoughtful, really reflective responses. I'm sure that the students who are here have really appreciated hearing and benefiting from all of your experiences. And just thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this panel. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here and to just hear you sharing your wisdom and your reflections throughout. Really, really lovely. So thank you all so, so much. And thank you all for students who have attended as well. There's lots of messages I'm just seeing flickering in the chat about thank you and so appreciated and thank you and that kind of thing. So we really do appreciate you making the time for us this evening. And yeah, sharing those really important insights and kind of discoveries along the way. So thanks everyone else for attending. As I mentioned before, this will be posted on the Skills Lab, and there was a question wondering, where is the Skills Lab? When you open up your Moodle student page, if you look at your courses that you're attending, there is a link called the Skills Learning Lab, and that's That's the link that you'd click. But yes, thank you all for joining us tonight, and take good care. Bye.
I'll enjoy my new couch. Thank you for putting that in there, Lori.
I want to know what brand did you buy?
We can all come and have a little jam in my little office.